Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Thursday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm David Percy. Up first, hazardous weather graphic. There's a high wind watch out for the eastern Aleutians on Alaska, Dutch Harbor, Nikolsky, otherwise the Fox Islands. That's kicks into effect, Friday afternoon and continues through Friday night for sustained winds of 40 to 60 miles an hour with gusts to 80 miles per hour. Right now it's just a watch, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is upgraded to a warning here later tonight or this evening, or definitely by tomorrow. Otherwise, the other area is a flood advisory out for Mendenhall Lake, and that's flooding caused by excessive rainfall recently, and again for the Mendenhall Lake and River area, and that's out until 10 p.m. this evening. And this morning, stage was about 8¼ feet of the river, and the crest is expected up about 9.65 feet at around 4 p.m. this afternoon, about another half hour or so from right now during this recording. And so minor flooding in low-lying areas and poor drainage areas near Mendenhall Lake and River expected until about 10 p.m. Then it should end. And from there, satellite imagery showing front having moved through the Panhandle and into northwest Canada there, continues to pull off and weaken, and low pressure off the coast continues to circulate surges of moisture in with rain across much of the southeast coast, getting a little more showery down along the south coast of the Panhandle today, and ending up around Yakutat, much lighter amounts fell, and just some clouds over the North Gulf Coast into the Copper River Basin area and the Kenai Peninsula. Some sunshine, Mananuska, Susitna Valley, especially the Susitna Valley down through Cook Inlet and the western Kenai Peninsula, all the way down to Kodiak Island. We had some pretty gusty northwest winds there, as well as the Alaska Peninsula. A lot of showers coming down with the cold air coming into the northern Bering Sea there out of the Russian Far East and through the Bering Strait from the Chukchi Sea, taking a turn to the southeast. You can see one surge of moisture out having moved across Kodiak. Clear skies this afternoon there. Much of the area, some Shelikof Strait, or clouds on the Shelikof Strait area there, and then showers over the Alaska Peninsula. Cold Bay picking up about 1/4 inch of precipitation in the last 12 hours there. Some showers ending over the Pribilofs. Next system, mostly warm front rain spreading into the western Aleutians. And you can see that pushing mostly off to the east and to the northeast, with the main low center now just coming onto the map there just south of the Komodorsky Island areas. And on the chart, 975 millibar low to just southwest of Shimianatu, with the warm front bringing rain in toward Adak, all the way back to the Komodorskys. A little bit of a break with high pressure there in advance of that around Atka Island, beginning to move into the eastern Aleutians. Otherwise, showers of rain or snow, depending on your elevation there for the Alaska Peninsula. And again, anywhere from 1/10 to 1/3 of an inch of precipitation falling there. Pretty strong winds on the back in that gradient there between the higher pressure over the south central Bering Sea and the low in the Gulf. Kodiak State Airport had wind gusts to 60 miles per hour earlier this morning. Port Heiden late last night and early this morning, all same thing. Peak wind gusts about 60 miles an hour, and 30 to 40 mile an hour winds at Seward and Valdez today. Out of the northeast at Valdez, northwest at Seward there in Resurrection Bay, quite windy day today. And pretty good gradient along the southeast coast, winds of 30 to 45 miles an hour with some higher gusts earlier on. Cape Decision had peak wind gusts, I believe, earlier today or overnight last night, about 55 miles an hour. Lighter winds on the north coast there, but rainfall amounts about 1/4 of an inch at Juneau in the last 12 hours, while Petersburg, Klawock, and Heidelberg all picked up 1/2 inch of rain in that same time period. It's not all that heavy, but kind of an extensive area of wet weather there, and dries out over the North Gulf Coast. Had some areas of light snow over the Tanana Valley. up to the Yukon Flats over toward the border there, down into the Copper River Basin, some snow showers, scattered snow showers, Kuskokwim Valley, Alaska Range, and areas of snow showers along and off the west coast there into the eastern Bering Sea, all the way up to the western central Arctic coast, but nothing heavy. Skies tending to clear out. Bethel did pick up about 2 inches of snow earlier today. That ended about 10 o'clock, and they've since cleared out there. And for tonight, you'll see that low deepens a little bit there as it tracks into the southern Bering Sea, kind of moving east-northeast. Will take a more easterly direction later tonight and tomorrow, but look for the winds to increase over the western and central Aleutians. Winds and precipitation increase for the Fox Islands, Pribilof Islands, and kind of a break there for the Alaska Peninsula. Some lingering shower activity there, but it'll be pretty light and light winds. Winds stay gusty there for Kodiak Island and into the Cook Inlet area, Resurrection Bay. Channeled north winds out of the passes and bays there along the North Gulf Coast, Copper River Delta, and the channeled areas of Prince William Sound, and a little breezy over the eastern Copper River Basin, but nothing too strong, with some areas of snow with that weak low persisting there near the Yukon Flats. So areas from the mid and upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, continue to see cloudy skies with periods of light snow, flurries, or snow showers. That same sort of pattern along the Arctic coast as well. And with that low in the Gulf, southwest flow, south to southwest flow keeps surges of moisture moving into the Panhandle, and that's going to keep it unsettled through the night tonight. And finally, that low kicks inland over the northern Panhandle, so look for periods of rain to continue, becoming more showery in the afternoon. But another wet day, cloudy skies there, and not too bad over the interior, as that next intense storm brings gale warnings, storm warnings, hurricane force wind warnings to the central Aleutians, Pribilof Islands, Fox Islands, Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, and the southeast Bering Sea in general, as that tracks eastward just north of Unalaska Island tomorrow afternoon, with rain and snow into Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, and mostly snow there along the southwest coast. It'll be light, though, with easterly flow. And again, the high wind watch out for Friday afternoon for the eastern Aleutians. Look for winds to increase, possible gust to 80 miles an hour through Friday night there as that low center tracks off to the north. You can see the very tight pressure field there on the west and southwest quadrant of that low center, gradually spreading out across the Aleutians. And then for the day on Saturday, first day of the weekend, that low tracks eastward across the Alaska Peninsula Friday night and early Saturday across southern Kodiak Island into the western Gulf by afternoon. And the front pushes out right up to the southwest coast for good gale force winds of 40 to 45 knots, with rain heavy at times moving into the Panhandle there. And rain and snow for the North Gulf Coast, and possibly getting into Turnagain Arm. Kind of hard to tell how far west that'll get. Probably just a brief snow period for the Chugach Mountains eastward and the southern Copper River Basin. Otherwise, the interior dry and cold Arctic coast continues with fog, low clouds, fog, flurries at times up there into the Chukchi Sea, and cold air continues to move southward over the Bering Sea, probably bringing snowfall levels down close to sea level to the Pribilofs. Look for rain and snow showers, gusty northwest winds, possibly up to 50 miles an hour for the Alaska Peninsula, but winds on the decrease along with the precip for the Fox Islands. Lows for tonight, 30s for the Panhandle, single numbers for interior Alaska to 20s along the coast, teens for Bristol Bay, highs tomorrow, upper 30s, Kodiak, and in the 20s, south central Alaska, teens, Kuskokwim Valley, Copper River Basin, mid to upper 20s in Bristol Bay, and in the 40s for the Panhandle. Lows Saturday morning, below 0 for the Copper River Basin, and around 5 for the Kuskokwim Valley, teens, Bristol Bay, south central Alaska, near 10 for the Susitna Valley, and lower 20s down toward Homer. And then the highs Saturday afternoon, 40s for the Panhandle, teens in the Copper River Basin and the Kuskokwim Valley, 20s to lower 30s elsewhere, except Kodiak Island, into the lower 40s. Up to the north, lows around 5 below for the Brooks Range North Slope, single numbers and teens for the Arctic coast, and lower 20s for the Seward Peninsula. Either side of 0 for interior Alaska, mostly on the plus side. And then highs tomorrow in the teens, single numbers for the Brooks Range into the North Slope. Upper 20s for the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. Lows in the mid-20s, St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, 5 below to 5 above for the central and eastern interior, and teens 5 to 15 for the Arctic coast, followed by highs 15 to 22 for the Arctic coast, and mostly in the teens interior Alaska. Out to the southwest, mid-20s along the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coast for the lows tonight, mid-30s for the Pribilofs, 40 to 45 for the Aleutians, followed by highs in the 40s, lower 30s for the southwest coast, low cooler on Saturday.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And first line weather graphic for Friday morning. Marginal VFR, North Slope, Arctic coast. A lot of VFR in the interior with an area of marginal VFR. They're from the Yukon Flats southwestward in the central interior, and then down along the eastern Kuskokwim Valley, western Alaska range. VFR south central Alaska to Kodiak Island. VFR for Bristol Bay. And marginal for the western Alaska Peninsula, Pribilofs, north through the Bering Strait. Big area of IFR coming into the eastern Aleutians, covering the Bering Sea. And all the way out to Shimi and Attu. Marginal VFR for Prince William Sound, eastern North Gulf Coast, and the Panhandle. And for the afternoon hours, that area of IFR out over the Bering Sea shifts eastward, up across the Pribilofs down to the Alaska Peninsula, and starting to improve Nikolsky late in the afternoon, but IFR still into Atka Island, becoming VFR for the western Aleutians. Southern Alaska, especially in the interior, including Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, VFR. Some marginal VFR, again, over the Yukon Flats, northeastward there, and along the Arctic coast, through the Bering Strait, especially the north side of the Seward Peninsula. Panhandle, marginal VFR, as well as most of the Gulf of Alaska. And for Saturday morning, IFR, eastern and central Arctic coast, and some IFR there over the Yukon Flats. Otherwise, areas of marginal VFR over southern Alaska, with areas of VFR as well. Nunivak Island, southwest coast, VFR up into Norton Sound, marginal VFR from the Bering Strait, and into the Noatak Valley there, and then south across the Seward or the St. Lawrence Island area, Pribilofs, to the eastern Aleutians, IFR, Alaska Peninsula, southern Bristol Bay, and across Kodiak Island, VFR for the Panhandle and the central and western Aleutians. For the afternoon, all of the Bering Sea and Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, areas of marginal VFR there, and that extends up to St. Lawrence Island. Some IFR for the Bering Strait and up toward Shishmaref, northwest coast, western central Arctic coast, and then VFR, eastern interior, marginal VFR from the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, and about 2/3 of the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet in the VFR zone for Saturday afternoon. Madanuska-Susitna Valley looking good, as well as the Copper River Basin. Marginal VFR for the southeast coast, North Gulf Coast, and for the passes. And Atuvik and Adigan, both looking good tomorrow. VFR on either approach. And Lake Clark and Merrill, good VFR there, either entrance. Rainy, VFR. Windy, VFR. Isabel, looking good, VFR. And Mintesta, VFR. Tanita, also VFR, as well as Portage, VFR, west and east entrance. Chilkoot and White, though, call it marginal VFR at times through the day Friday. Freezing levels at the surface there, south of St. Matthew Island, but north of the Pribilofs, and then down off the southwest coast, across the Alaska Peninsula, cutting across Sitkinak Island, and south of the North Gulf Coast, right through the central Panhandle, 2,000 feet over Prince of Wales Island, and then a big push of warmer air, at least a short distance into the Aleutians, 8,000 feet, right along the Aleutian chain, with 2,000 feet a little farther to the north there. And for icing, with the moisture coming eastward, with a couple of systems, main areas there over the southeast coast, with some considerable moderate possible over the southeastern part of the Panhandle, moving from west to east, and also some considerable moderate rime icing as well for the southeast Bering Sea, Pribilofs, and Alaska Peninsula. Jet stream, the main strongest jet core, just near or south of the Aleutians, up to 160 knots there, and a little farther to the south of the Panhandle, actually now south of the Queen Charlotte's. Weaker flow, 60 to 75 knots out of the west-northwest across southwest Alaska and the Kenai Peninsula. 9,000 feet Low pressure there is south of the Pribilofs, north of the eastern Aleutians, 60 to 90 knot winds, and then southwest 45 knots over the Alaska Peninsula. And at 3,000 feet, several low centers, one over the northern panhandle with about 40 knot winds coming into the central southeast coast, and 85 knot winds there just over the eastern Aleutians. And moving on to turbulence, considerable moderate chop tomorrow for the Alaska Peninsula, all the Aleutian chain, and the Pribilofs as well. After the break, I'll be back with the marine forecasts.
Bienvenidos, Star Amigos. There is no wrong way to look at the night sky. But if you want to see more, grab a pair of binoculars. And this week, a double star cluster is in a great spot for a look-see. So let's hit the darkness and find it. Head outside after midnight and look almost straight up. Here you'll see Cassiopeia. To its right is Merfolk and Perseus. Between those is H and Chi Persei, aka NGC 869 and NGC 884. Let's get closer. The double cluster, H and Chi Persei, are open star clusters. They were first spotted by Hipparchus in 130 BCE and are about 7,000 light years away. They contain hundreds of blue-white stars. But if you can't see them, just scan east and point your binoculars at the incredible Pleiades. Use binoculars to make dimmer things seem brighter. Keep looking up.
Ever been to the beach and noticed litter like plastic bottles or foam takeout containers on the sand? Or maybe you've been to a river or bay where there's a bag or a car tire stuck in the mud on the shore, or a bunch of deflated balloons that say happy birthday floating in the water? All of that junk in the water or on the shoreline is considered marine debris. It's anything solid and man-made in the ocean or Great Lakes that is not supposed to be there. And anything people use every day can become marine debris if they don't dispose of it properly. And I mean anything. The most common items we find when we do shoreline cleanups are plastics. But we also find rubber, cloth, glass, metal, and paper litter. Sometimes the debris is so tiny, like a plastic microbead from your face wash, that you can barely see it in the water. Marine debris is more than just trash in the ocean. Sometimes fishers lose their gear like fishing traps, nets, or fishing line, and it continues to drift through the water, catching animals for a long time. We call that derelict fishing gear, and it's marine debris. Have you ever seen an old boat left behind on a shoreline? Abandoned and derelict vessels are also marine debris. So let's review. Anything we use every day can become marine debris if we don't dispose of it properly or if it goes into the water by accident. Marine debris can be very small or can be very big, and anything in between. But most importantly, marine debris is one of the biggest pollution problems facing the world's oceans and waterways today.
How does marine debris impact the ocean, animals, and me? Would you want to swim in a beach littered with trash? Of course not. And the animals who live in the ocean don't either. The difference is, they don't have a choice. Marine species often get tangled in debris, from fishing nets to six-pack rings. If they get caught, they could get injured or even die. And even if they don't get entangled, many animals mistake plastic debris for food and eat it. This fills their stomach with junk they can't digest. Debris can also damage important habitats, like coral reefs, by breaking or smothering them. Corals serve as the base of the marine ecosystem, and impacts here can be felt all the way to you and me. Plus, plastics have harmful chemicals in them. Fish eat plastic, we eat fish. The question is, can those chemicals harm us? Marine debris also hurts the economy. It costs a lot of money to clean up, and people don't want to go to dirty beaches. Boats and ships could run into large pieces of debris too, or get their propellers tangled. We need the ocean and everything in it, And the ocean needs us to keep it free of debris. What can we do about marine debris?
A lot of the trash that's in our ocean is plastic.
And that marine debris is hurting our environment, economy, and health.
The problem will only get worse.
Unless we change the way we consume and dispose of products. There are solutions,
And together, we can prevent litter from ending up in the ocean. Some people might say,
well, I'm just one person, so I can't make a difference.
but that's just not true.
If each person who creates trash, and that's just about everyone, took action, it would add up to a whole lot of change.
So what can we do?
Well, the ultimate solution is prevention. And we need to keep that as our highest priority.
We can reduce, reuse, and recycle to keep debris out of the ocean in the first place.
You can bring your own shopping bag, drink out of a reusable bottle, and participate in things like a shoreline cleanup.
Join a group cleaning up the beach or grab some friends and clean up your street. It's easy.
Be more conscious of how many disposable plastic items you're using. And if you do,
Where are you putting it? In the trash can? Whoops. Or in the recycling bin?
so here's the challenge. The next time you finish using a throwaway item, a bag, a bottle, or utensil, answer the question, where is this going? Because ultimately, when you throw stuff away, there really is no away. It has to go somewhere.
So keep asking yourself this important question.
How will you keep your trash from becoming marine debris?
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Okay, moving into marine forecasts. Small craft advisories on the south coast of the Panhandle tomorrow for south to southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. North coast, south to southwest 20 to 25 knots. And for Lynn Canal, winds will be south on Friday at 20 knots. Small craft advisories for Clarence Strait for south winds at 30 knots. And Stevens Passage, southeast winds 25 knots. And the outlook for Saturday, first day of the weekend, gale warnings all along the outer coast of the Panhandle. On the south coast, south to southwest, 40 to 45 knots. North coast, southeast winds, 40 to 45 knots. Seas running 12 feet in the north coast to a little over 20 feet down along Prince of Wales Island. And for the Clarence Strait area, southern inside channels, southeast winds 30 knots and southeast 25 for Stevens Passage. Lynn Canal, north winds 25 knots, seas 5 feet. Prince William Sound on Friday, north winds at 20 knots. Otherwise, the North Gulf Coast looking at north to northeast winds at 15 knots. Gale warnings for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay for northwest winds at 40 knots. Much lighter in Cook Inlet, where winds will be north at about 10 knots. And for Saturday, big increase in the winds for Cook Inlet, especially south of the Forelands. Gale warnings, north winds 40 knots, seas building to 10 feet. Storm warnings for Kamishak Bay, northwest winds 50 knots. Gale warnings for the Barren Islands, north winds 45 knots. And for the North Gulf Coast, east-northeast winds 40 to 45 knots with seas a little under 20 feet. And Prince William Sound, Saturday, northeast winds 30 knots, seas 7 feet. Kodiak Island, gale warnings, northwest winds 30 knots Friday, 35 knots Friday. Alaska Peninsula, south winds 35 to 40 knots. And Bristol Bay, northeast winds 30 knots. For Saturday, gale warnings continue for Kodiak Island, west-northwest 40 to 45 knots for the winds there. And the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula to Bristol Bay, gale warnings, northwest winds 35 knots. Storm warnings on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula from Sitkinak to Castle Cape, winds will be northwest at 45 knots. And then for the eastern Aleutians on Friday, hurricane force wind warnings, south to southwest winds 60 to 70 knots, seas running 23 to 35 feet. And hurricane force wind warning also for the central Aleutians. West winds 55 to 65 knots with gusts to 70 knots. And western Aleutians, storm warnings, west-northwest winds at 40 to 50 knots. And for Saturday, small craft advisories, much lighter winds now for the Aleutian chain, but westerlies 25 to 30 knots from Shemia to Adak. And Atka, northwest at 30 knots, and northwest winds 30 to 35 knots for the eastern Aleutians. Southwest coast, Kuskokwim Delta coast, southeast winds 35 knots. Storm warnings for the Pribilof Islands tomorrow. East winds 50 knots, seas 15 feet. Yukon Delta coast, east winds at 30 knots. And St. Matthew Island, northeast winds 25 knots. Northeast at 15 for St. Lawrence Island. St. Lawrence Island on Saturday, small craft advisories, northwest winds 25 knots, and gale warnings for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, northwest winds 35 knots, Yukon Delta coast, northwest at 30, and 25 knot winds from the west for the Pribilofs, and northwest 25 for St. Matthew Island. For the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, small craft advisories on Friday, east winds 25 knots for the central and west coast, east winds at 20 knots, Chukchi Sea, northwest winds 20 knots. And for Saturday, for the Chukchi Sea, southwest winds at 15 knots, and for the western Arctic coast, east winds at 20 knots. Small craft advisories for the central and eastern coastline there for east winds at 30 knots with 7 to 8 foot seas. For tonight, a couple of low centers, one in the Gulf there weakening, keeps it wet over the panhandle with troughs rotating in from the southwest right off the Pacific. Dry and breezy, Kodiak Island stays windy into Cook Inlet and Mananuska Valley, gusty northeast winds, but dry conditions, some light snow persisting with a weak low up over the eastern interior, as well as the Arctic coast could see some flurries. Rain and wind there for the Aleutians increases as that low intensifies, especially on the back side there with those west-northwest winds up to hurricane force wind warnings out in that area. Otherwise dry and cold over the interior, and that low shifts into the Gulf of Alaska on Saturday with gale force winds for the panhandle with heavy rain.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.